Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Good
It's
morning.
Monday, we're all excited. Welcome, everyone, to the public briefing. This is the Committee of Accountability and Oversight. This morning we are live. It's a public hearing on the 2023 Wildfire Response Review by the Minister of ECC. I'd like to welcome those joining us online. Welcome everyone here this morning. Just for procedure, we will be asking all questions be directed through the chair. We do have our staff operating our microphones for those joining us joining us online to ensure everyone gets the responses and everything is clear. So with that, I'll ask Minister MacDonald to introduce himself and his staff, and we will begin the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to be here today to provide committee with a briefing on the external review of the 2023 wildfire response. The 2023 wildfire season was the most challenging ever seen in the Northwest Territories and a record year across Canada. After-action reviews of individual fires are an important part of ECC's normal business. But given the unprecedented nature of the 2023 fire season, we decided to contract a comprehensive independent review of this record season. A team of external wildfire and program assessment experts reviewed details of the 2023 wildfire season, our wildfire management response, and lessons learned moving forward. The review was initiated in December 2023 and included extensive interviews, workshops, and a review of our policies, procedures, decision-making, and documentation. A final report was released in August of 2024 and includes 25 recommendations and 15 opportunities for the GNWT to enhance wildfire prevention, mitigation, and response activities. ECC has agreed in principle with all of the recommendations and started implementing many of them for the 2024 wildfire season. With me today is Deputy Minister Aaron Kelly, Assistant Deputy Minister of Wildlife and Forestry Brett Elkin, Mike Gravel, Director of Forest Management Division, as well as representatives from NMP, Clint Abbott, and Shauna McGarvey, who conducted the external review. I would like to turn things over to Clint and Shauna to provide a presentation of the review, followed by a presentation by ECC on what we've done to implement the recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister MacDonald. Please proceed.
Good morning, and thank you for having us today. My name is Shauna McGarvey, and I'm a partner with MMP, and I'm here with my colleague, Clint Abbott, a senior manager based out of our Victoria office. I'm based out of our Calgary office, but currently in high level at the moment. MMP would like to begin by recognizing and commending everyone involved in the wildfire response. The summer of 2023 was truly unprecedented, both in the Northwest Territories and across Canada. The dedication and commitment of those engaged in the wildfire efforts was evident to us throughout the course of our review. We also want to acknowledge all of those affected by the fires. We understand that 2023 was an incredibly challenging year, with the fires impacting thousands across the territory. The resilience and strength shown by the people of the Northwest Territories was remarkable. Thank you for having us here today. What we'd like to do is go through a bit of a brief presentation and overview of our review of the 2023 wildfire response. We're going to highlight a number of our recommendations and key findings, although we will not go through all of them, just so that we can have enough time for questions and conversation. Clint and myself were two of the MMP individuals involved in the wildfire, although we had a broader team as well, including Todd Nash, 30-year forester and partner with the firm, and subcontractors with expertise specifically in wildfire. So if you have any questions, I understand that we'll take them after the presentation, but please feel free to ask us what you need. I'll move to the next slide. Thank you. There we go. Thank you very much. So just wanted to begin by setting the stage. We heard the term unprecedented a lot, but I think the evidence bears this out. The 2023 season was truly an unprecedented season, not only across the Northwest Territories, but other parts of Canada, including Alberta, Quebec, BC, and Nova Scotia. All of these areas saw their worst wildfire season on record. The season was characterized by early onset and rapidly escalating wildfires beginning in late April and not ending until early November. You can see on the slide here that the number of wildfires in Canada was over 7,000 wildfires with over 17 million hectares burned, more than 200 community evacuation, and 8 lives lost. If you want more details and more context for the Canadian wildfire season, please see our report as we detail it and provide more information there. In the Northwest Territories, the wildfire season began early on May 4th, the earliest start in any recent season. And you can see again by the stats we have on the slide here that the number of wildfires was 306, or over 300 wildfires, over 3 million or almost 3.5 million hectares burned, 19 community evacuation, and 1 life lost. The data suggests that the unprecedented 2023 wildfire season was a 2 years in the making by abnormally dry to moderate drought conditions that began in the fall of 2022 and continued into the spring of 2023. Fires were caused by early snowmelt, sustained drought conditions, climate change-induced factors such as extreme temperatures, high winds, and periods without significant rainfall. There was also frequent lightning strikes. And smoke conditions throughout July and August impeded air attack and air support efforts. Importantly, I think it is to note that throughout the wildfire season, and particularly in relation to the 2 fires that we reviewed for you and that we'll discuss today, that's SF15 and SS52, that there were multiple wildfires, concurrent wildfires throughout the territory, as well as Canada throughout this season, and that placed enormous strain on resources and resourcing. I have the next slide, please. And Clint, feel free to jump in. Clint and I worked on this together, so there'll be times when we might support each other and provide additional context or information.
Thanks, Shauna, will do.
Thank you. So just to give a bit of an overview of the methodology that we used in the context of our review. So MMP, as you may know, is a professional services firm. We provide, in addition to sort of our core strengths of accounting and audit, we also provide program evaluation, program review in a variety of contexts, as well as engagement works and engagement supports. We do a lot of this work in the context of being a professional services firm. We have a very developed consulting advisory practice as well. And so we were contracted in the late fall almost early winter of 2023 to do the third-party independent review. We have a long history of doing independent reviews on wildfires and other kinds of hazards. Our specific task was focused on the preparedness and the response to the 2023 wildfire season by ECC. We wanted to identify lessons learned, including recommendations and opportunities for improvement, and where current activities should be sustained. So the goal of the review was not an audit, but it was to look at what the wildfire response was, in particular the wildfire response, not the evacuation efforts, to look at the wildfire response and identify lessons learned and identify areas for improvement and for continued growth. Our review, you can see the project timeline along the right-hand side there, began in November of 2023, and we concluded by providing the report in late July of 2024. It involved facilitated engagement sessions. There was 4 regional in-person sessions, a virtual session, and then we had an in-person session with the FMD, another virtual session with the FMD, and then a stakeholder section. We did as much as we could in person and then supplemented that by virtual interviews. We did 57 one-on-one virtual and in-person interviews. We spoke with over 100 people and we invited over 140 individuals to participate. We had an initial list identified by ECC of those involved in the response efforts, and that was really important. It was those involved in the wildfire response that we were tasked with speaking with. In the course of our interviews and facilitated sessions, we asked for additional names and learned of additional people that we needed to speak to. And so we expanded our scope to talk to as many people that we could who were involved in the response efforts for both of these fires. We made multiple reach outs to other individuals and other groups of people. I think, as I said, we tracked over 140 invitations and made multiple attempts to get in touch with people. In addition to the engagement work that we did that began in February and really continued into April, we prepared a What We Heard report, a summary of our findings from that engagement, but we supported that What We Heard work or that engagement work with research and analysis on various key documents, including legislation, SOPs, after action reviews, any incident action plans that were available, budgets, strategies, and then all of the weather reporting and fire modeling and data that was available to us. And again, there's the timeline on the right side of the screen there and includes all the key steps. Again, our report details our methodology in detail. Next slide, please. So the report that I think by now you've all had an opportunity to review has a number of key components. So the main report identified 11 key themes that Clint will walk us through here in a moment, with 25 recommendations and 17 opportunities for improvement. We're not going to discuss each and every one of these, but again, the report provides that detail for you. We also included the What We Heard report that we tabled at the end of March. That was the basis of our engagement findings. And again, within that, we identified 5 key themes, including human resourcing and supports, machinery and equipment resourcing, policies, procedures and process, fire prevention and communications. In addition to the What We Heard report, you'll also find in the main report or the final report 2 case studies. The first case study on the Enterprise and Hay River fire with 7 recommendations, and then a case study on the Vetch Cove Yellowknife fire with 6 recommendations. These recommendations are independent of the 11 key recommendations, and by independent I mean they're specifically related to these fires, but can speak to the broader and overall response of ECCC. And then finally, you'll find in the final report ECCC's response to the recommendations and opportunities for improvement. Next slide, please. And then the main report key themes you can see through here, including theme fire modeling and behavior, human resources and capacity, and then human resources, training and skills management. We thought it was important to break these 2 out. There was significant amount of conversation in detail, both in the engagement and then in our findings through sorry, I have a lot of noise going on around me because I'm in a hotel and a little bit distracting. Somebody's brushing snow off my window. Apologies for that. So human resourcing, including aviation, then followed up by aviation resources, equipment management and infrastructure, incident command system discipline, policy, strategy, and procedures, wildfire response and information sharing, coordination and with municipal Indigenous governance, prevention and community protection, and finally, budgeting and reporting and structure. So those are the key themes. We're going to touch on a sampling of these, the ones that we sort of felt were kind of the key or core findings of our report. I'll pass that on to Clint.
Thank you, Shauna, and thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Minister McDonald and all committee members for the opportunity today. As Shauna mentioned, we've just chosen a few areas to highlight, recognizing that the report has a lot of content to it and a lot of information. The first one that I'd like to highlight is what we call situational awareness. And this relates to the ability to understand, as well as possible, fire behavior, contributing factors, possible scenarios. And I really like to bring your attention to the quote on the various pages as we go ahead. And these come from participants in the study. So this one, we don't have the right tools for the job. And what this refers to in the factors that are included is software. So for instance, fire behavior modeling, weather modeling, the ability to both have the software that's up to date, but also the ability to use it. In addition, one of the contributing factors is the data that goes into this software, where we found there was limits on the resolution of the data and inputs that are required to get accurate modeling. And one particular area I'd flag is fuel mapping, and that refers not to fuel, for instance, the aviation fuel, but rather the vegetation within the forest floor, for instance, that constitutes fuel. And the consequence we found of these factors are that predictions are not necessarily that accurate. and that there's also a high reliance on external modeling experts who, during especially in the 2023 season, were in demand elsewhere. The factors that we found and both the consequences led us to certain recommendations in this area. First of all, is to decide upon and invest in a nationally recognized and proven software and commit to that use, to invest in training in a larger set of employees and specialists in that ability to use the software, and then also invest in both system and research to update fuel, weather, and topographical data necessary for the software to do its best at predicting. The next slide, please, will go on to another theme, which is resourcing in this case. And again, I bring your attention to the quote here. We did not have the crews for the type of work needed to conduct the necessary fire suppression activities. And within this resourcing one, as mentioned in our initial overview, it's important to recognize that the Northwest Territories was not unique in their fire situation, and resourcing demands were similar across Canada and in other areas outside of Canada. But what we found here is, first of all, some of the factors is overall an insufficient number of resources and redundancy in positions for the number of fires, the magnitude, and the time periods for the fires in 2023, which started early and went well into the late summer, early fall period. The number of wildland firefighters within the Northwest Territories has declined over the past 32 years, and there was a high reliance on imported resource. So for instance, in 2023, 568 imported positions were held over the season, which is roughly 5 to 6 times the normal average. And these resources are typically shared through what's called CIFC, or the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre. And that works well in a typical year, but 2023 was not a typical year, and other resources were also trying to draw upon CIFC to import resources. The consequence of the challenges with resources was that there was long hours. There was many consecutive days for certain positions, and this was out of necessity. And in some cases, positions were being filled by individuals who didn't have the experience or qualification for those specific positions. And it meant that some fire operations struggled to make do with less resources, to make do with not necessarily resources with the correct training or qualifications, and that resulted in less overall resources that was actually required. Our recommendation here is to at minimum add 2 full crews, which include overhead support to ECC's complement going forward. But moreover, our recommendation is to perform scenario work to better understand in the future, with climate change considerations, with weather behavior changes taken into account, what the new normal may be for the Northwest Territories going forward, and to do scenarios to understand what type of full complements might be required going forward. If we go to the next slide, please, I'll switch to the next highlight. And this is with regards to mental health supports, which is still under Theme 1, Human Resources in our report. And as previously mentioned, shortages in resources led many people, many of which were, as Shauna mentioned at the outset, extremely dedicated and deserve commendation, to work long hours and many consecutive days in a row. This, and what we found, was that the support available for people did not match the needs. And it's both support for the positions, but then consequently the support for people in terms of mental health supports, critical and stress management supports. And we found that they were both not necessarily accessible in the manner people needed or appropriate. And so as an example here, that the Territories has an employee family assistance program with counselors. And we heard time and time again through participants in the study that they said when they tried to access this, they spoke to someone virtually who was either in Toronto or in Ottawa, and who had no awareness of the North, no awareness of the Indigenous and cultural factors in the North, no awareness of what the wildfire suppression activities and management consists of. And so the consequence here was both short-term and longer-term impacts to the physical and mental health of people involved in the response. There's burnout that was experienced from people, the lack of ability to sustain focus, the lack of ability to sustain passion, resulting in time off and uncertainty going forward. And so our recommendations in this area is to, first of all, is two components to this. One is to certainly enhance the type and appropriateness of mental health support for people. That means looking at culturally appropriate supports. It means looking at supports that understand the local context, and also to put efforts into enhancing the well-being and morale of teams. And this mean earlier in the year to implement team appreciation initiatives or enhance those that are already in place, but to ensure people are both supported during the year, but also in those times of extreme stress with the right type of supports that work for them. We go to the next slide, please. The highlight here is related to incident command system departure. And what we found during the work was that there was times during certain fires that ICS or incident command structure was not adhered to by certain teams or team members. And what I want to note first of all is that when we found departures from ICS, we didn't find any direct correlation to loss of structures. So I think it's a really important part to emphasize here. However, we did find that policies and procedures and SOPs related to maintaining ICS were not widely known or adhered to. We also realize and want to recognize that the operating context within the 2023 season and the rapid changing in fire dynamics and the concurrent fires and other compounding fires did place great stress on all people and the whole ICS system. However, the consequence of these factors was that there were delays in decision making. We did hear of many conflicts that occurred both within ECC and within incident management teams at an individual level, and situations that increased adverse outcomes or the risk of adverse outcomes. Our recommendations here is to continue the work that we understand is already committed to broaden ICS training, not just those typically involved, but those who might be in surge capacity positions, and also to recommit to the principles across ECC and the GNWT writ large to enhance reporting protocols with regards to non-compliances, to allow learning, to understand when those situations do occur in departures, to be able to capitalize on those learnings as things go forward. I'll go to the next highlight, please, which is with regards to information share. And again, I'll highlight this quote: the use of personal social media accounts is an easy way for misinformation to spread. And to put this in context, what we heard, and we heard many accounts of this, is that, first of all, various channels and platforms were used by the government of the Northwest Territories. However, individuals were also found to be using channels on their own to spread information within communities. And some of this information was done, or information and communication was done in an ad hoc way without vetted information. And that resulted in lack of awareness of the correct information within a community. At times it resulted in panic of certain individuals, confusion of what was the current status, and then it also resulted in ECC having to spend more time correcting inaccuracies of information. Our recommendation here is, first of all, is to enhance the education and communication with regards to communication protocols and channels. And this is at varying levels. So it's both within government, but also within communities. And that also comes to our other recommendations, is to update and reaffirm protocols such as the Wildfire Event Notification Protocol that exists between ECC and MACA, and having a commitment to adhere to those protocols at all levels of people involved. And then finally is also to conduct off-season community engagement to further share and enhance learning and explain to how the communication protocols work and how it work in any situation going forward. Go to our next slide, please. The final highlight that I'll give is with regards to program structure. And here, the current reality is there is a split in authority between FMD, or the Forest Management Division, and the regions. There's also differing levels of service that we heard of between region, differing approaches, and thus a lack of consistency across the regions. And we do recognize that each of the 5 regions within the Northwest Territories have the uniqueness, they have their own unique factors, and they also have different differences in terms of the geography of those regions. However, the consequence of this split authority is that first of all, there's 2 main issues. Is one, being a small organization, there's not enough resources in each region to fully run a fire program on their own. The current structure has barriers to resource sharing, and control is currently dispersed. But also, we don't, or the territories doesn't have enough HR and financial control within the current structure to operate in this decentralized manner. One thing to note is that other jurisdictions in Canada, you do use a more centralized model. For instance, within Alberta, all regions do report into a single executive director. Our recommendations here is, first of all, is to consolidate regional and territorial aspects of the program into a single program, to consolidate budget, human resourcing, and reporting, and so that the local regions do all report into FMD. I could go to the next slide, please. So I'll turn this back to Shauna for the 2 highlights, and then after that, it will come back to me for an overall perspective on the recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Clint. So just to give a bit of an overview and highlights of the 2 specific wildfires that we looked at. So we did take, and you'll find again within the report, a deeper dive or case study into SS52 and ZF15, with a timeline and TikTok essentially of the wildfire in the context of the region, in additional recommendations. But key findings in relation to the Hay River Enterprise fire is similar to what Cliff pointed to here, which is inconsistent regular reporting and documentation. We understand the context of the wildfire season. There was a lot going on, not just at this particular fire, but other regional fires as well, and the broader Northwest Territories. And so priority around the wildfire response, at times reporting and following up with IEPs was not always likely not always a priority. And so some of this inconsistent documentation does pose a bit of a challenge for complete understanding in some areas. And we've pointed that out in the main body of the report. But just important to note that some discipline around this is really, really important. Frequent and disrupted team dynamics were, again, we heard from those involved in the wildfire response that there were times some challenging team dynamics, in relation to reporting structures, but also in relation to just on the ground fire line response. Insufficient information sharing. This also speaks to poor situational awareness and communications with the EMOs. You'll note at the time of the run on Enterprise and Hay River that the day before, on August 12th, there was over 600 people in the community of Enterprise, and the community of Hay River was receiving evacuees from Fort Smith up to August 12th, and a day later we had the evacuation of those 2 communities and the inundation of Enterprise. And so it suggests to us that there is a lack of a situational awareness about the significance of these wildfires that was being communicated, and the potential for these wildfires to take a kind of a run to the SAOs and to the emergency management structures in these communities. And that also ties back to the gaps in wildfire behavior modeling. There was some outdated information or some time lags in the modeling information that was being used to understand what was happening on the ground with the Hay River and Enterprise fire. Another key finding that we heard in our engagement efforts was sort of the lack of formal linkages between wildland and structural fires. We spoke to the fire chiefs in both Hay River and Enterprise, and one of the challenges they had was sort of, the relationships with the wildland or with ECC were not always as developed. There wasn't as much experience in terms of desktop exercises and relationship building that I think would be needed in order to support another type of hazard season like this. The other thing is, developing of MOUs or relationship sharing agreements with other districts. We heard quite frequently or regularly that communities and their structural fire teams going above and beyond just their community boundaries in order to suppress wildfire. One of the key strengths, though, in relation to this fire was the strength of imported teams, working with the military and other imported teams, was highlighted as being a really important part of that response effort here. Our recommendations in relation or specific to this fire was to improve communication discipline, invest in forecasting and analysis resources, training and internal resources, doing more of those desktop exercise, more relationship building between the communities and the FMD, and then leveraging external resources and, of course, standardizing reporting. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then in relation to ZF-15 or the Betchco Yellowknife fire, a key finding here is that IMT and ICS do not always operate according to protocols. There needs to be continued investment in ICS training and supporting that moving forward. There was, again, inconsistent or delayed planning and forecasting and similar challenges around reporting that we found with the other fire, which is, when the fire got to the point where it was overwhelming, we see a bit of a gap in some of the reporting that helps us tell that story. There was an ineffective indirect attack strategy and execution, largely related to the smoke inundation. The modeling did indicate that it was an available and appropriate response, and certainly indirect attack is used in other jurisdictions across Canada, and modeling on the backburn claim that, or looks to or shows that the fire was likely headed towards Betchco, so it was an appropriate response, but in the end, the fire did reach Betchco. The main fire did reach Betchco, and likely would have, regardless of the indirect attack strategy. And then finally, in unclear communication and responsibilities between Indigenous governments and the GNWT, we note that a large part of the community was, of the Betchco community was not even in Betchco in the days leading up to the fire, so that may have hampered some of the communication efforts, but there was certainly some gaps around this, similar to the other fire, and so again, deepening those ties, doing more work to develop relationships, ensure that ICS structures are put in place, ensuring that the key communications, individuals responsible for wildfire response and emergency response in the community are connected, names are up to date, communication numbers are up to date, is really important. And then, improve planning and authorization processes for indirect attacks, invest in forecasting, reinforcing those ICS principles, and making sure that we have qualified people in key roles would be key recommendations in relation to this fire. Pass it back to you, Clint.
Thanks, Shauna. So overall, well, we've just given a summary and high level of certain aspects of the report. We understand all of you have had the chance to read it. And what we want to just highlight is that this type of review and the recommendations don't come out without resourcing implications. So just going over a few of these is that, first of all, we do recommend the creation of additional positions. We recommend the creation of 2 new full crews, which include what are called overhead supports. There is a resourcing implication of this. Also, with regards to fire behavior modeling and predictive capabilities, we recommend investment in software going forward that is nationally recognized and compatible with other jurisdictions. We do understand there's efforts underway for this, but it does require a continued investment. The commitment to training, which, for instance, in the ICS realm has increased, and I know understand this is a MACA initiative that started, but this does require full sustainment going forward. So it does require ongoing commitment on a year-to-year basis. The mental health supports is something that we are recommending that it be tailored to the unique needs of the territories. So this is more just investing in another employee family assistance program, but investing in strategies that are appropriate to, for instance, Indigenous community members, the type of supports that are needed, and then often might mean custom creation of supports for the territories. That with regards to the aspects of the report that comment on SOPs and procedures, what we did find is some of these are outdated or have not been modernized. And it does require time and resources, and often by internal people within positions that are trained and capable in this area to review and modernize those policies. There's a large number of those, and the resources required to go through them is to not be underestimated. Then the creation of culture and discipline regarding documentation reporting. This one's a little bit of a difficult one to put a firm resource amount on, because this requires a lot of efforts and behavior modeling from people in many different positions to show that commitment and show the willingness. And I know at the outset of this, the introduction to this review, this is one step to showing that commitment and transparency with regards to the willingness to learn going forward. And then finally, just that commitment to increase collaboration. And it's both interdepartmental, but it's also between GNWT departments and local authorities and Indigenous communities, that willingness to work together and to create different approaches for the work, which means both investment in relationships and long-term investment in those relationships and willingness to collaborate and work together. So I thank everybody for our listening to our summary and the opportunity to present this. And Mr. Chair, I turn back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott, Ms. McCarthy. We certainly appreciate you taking the time and giving the presentation this morning. Before I open it up to questions from our committee, I will now turn it back to the Minister and his staff, and they will give a presentation to the committee as well on their findings. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I'll turn it over to Director Gravel to do the presentation on the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to provide provide an update on the actions ECTC has taken to these recommendations. I think somehow this got ahead. Just fix that. My bad. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I want to start out, as the Minister has pointed out, that after-action reviews and individual fire reviews are a regular part of ECC's business. Our department has an active learning principle where we make adjustments as lessons are learned. And as we go through the recommendations, I want to highlight that many changes were made even before we received the results of the review. I'm going to speak to this more as I go through the presentation, but some examples include the fact that training was started much earlier this year than normal. Additional fire personnel and aircraft were brought on. We actively looked for overwinter fires and actioned any holdover fires we found early in the spring. And we enhanced our communications with community governments and Indigenous governments. As MNP has pointed out, the review had 11 broad themes with 25 recommendations and 17 opportunities for improvement. So essentially 42 action items. I'm pleased to share that many of these action items have been acted on or are in the process of being put in place. And as I mentioned, many of the recommendations were already being implemented before ECC received the results of the review. In other words, we recognized the same issues and had already started to take action. The 42 items are listed in the table that was shared previously, so I will not go into depth into each one, but I'll provide a summary of what we've done so far and what we have ongoing over winter. There are several recommendations under the fire behavior modeling, and we feel comfortable with the direction we're going to address the recommendations, including the fact that ECC uses 2 nationally accepted modeling programs. We have also committed to improving the data used to inform the models and other decision support tools, such as expanding the weather network that we use across the territory and making the weather network or the seasonal weather stations year-round. We are also working with the Canadian Forest Service to update our forest fuels data. And staff continue to be provided with fire behavior training. There are 4 staff in Hinton as we speak taking the Advanced Fire Behavior course, a national level course, and we expect to send a few more in the new year. The need for culturally appropriate mental health services was apparent to us even before the review was received. ECC initiated a contract with Indigenous Counseling Services this summer, which were used in Fort Good Hope and other situations this year. A standing offer agreement with Qualified Indigenous Counseling Services is also being worked on for implementation by next summer. A number of ECC staff are also attending a National Critical Incident Stress Management course to learn what more we should consider doing to support mental health of fire personnel. ECC supports the recommendation to add 2 sustained action crews, although additional resources will be required. We feel it is highly unlikely that we can add 20 firefighters in one location, so the model we are looking at is adding 5 to 10 sustained action firefighters in each of our regions. So we will deploy them to fires as a group as needed, but this approach will also increase the capacity across the territory and in smaller communities. MNP recommended starting the fire personnel earlier to complete training before active fire response. This is something that we had initiated before the release of the review. However, to be sustainable, we will need to identify additional resources to cover salary dollars for a longer season. ECC plans to hold centralized training camps as proposed, but given the significant logistical and cost implications associated with holding one large camp, we plan to hold 2 camps, a northern and a southern camp. Regarding the certification manual, a lot of progress has been made. We have a contractor working with us to bring all the details together to have a finished product ready this fiscal year. ECC is working closely with MACA, who are playing a lead role in expanding capacity through a redeployment process for GNWT staff across all departments. And MACA also has a 4-year plan to increase the number of GNWT staff in the incident command system, which will support deployment to emergency incidents across the territory. ECC has coordinated fire mapping training with the NWT Center for Geomatics, with 30 participants trained this past year to enhance fire mapping capabilities across all communities. Another recommendation was implementing a formal mentoring program. While I can't say we have a formal program yet, we are providing mentoring opportunities. As an example, we currently have a forest officer in a mentorship role with a leading national ignition specialist. This mentorship includes training and field activities over winter in southern Canada and the US. ECC also has an arrangement with the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre to train or to support NWT fighters or trainees gain experience under a cost share agreement. So essentially, we will send our staff to ongoing fires in other agencies, and so our staff can gain experience and get qualifications for their specific roles. One issue the review team captured was the challenges with accessing aircraft when the fire situation escalated. We are committed to working collaboratively with the Intergovernmental Council Secretariat on regulations for the Forest Act that will help resolve this in the future. There was also a recommendation to update our standing operating procedures for aircraft selection and process to access aircraft, and we are working on these with the goal of having them in place for next season. The equipment management section identified several opportunities for improvement, and we are actioning all of them. Tool hound training is planned for this winter. Starlink systems have been established at all our primary bases and most of our secondary bases, and we also have portable units for fires or other locations that require connectivity. And MACA has also ensured the regional emergency management organizations have Starlink as a backup. It was recommended that more ICS training be offered to GNWT departments, and as mentioned earlier, MACA has initiated this process. The incident command system has been used by ECC for many years and has been adopted across the GNWT as the response model to be used in any emergency incident. And as mentioned, MACA also worked with the Department of Finance to develop a redeployment process for GNWT staff. The review team found that while we have standard operating procedures to guide staff, they were While we have standing operating procedures to guide staff, they were not always accessible by all staff, and it was recommended that we do not rely solely on online guidance documents, but rather hard copy binders be provided. So for 2025, we expect to have these binders in place. It was also noted that we have not consistently achieved the level of after-action reviews that is expected. So we are committed to improve the process with the goal of having after-action reviews completed on every fire we respond to. This fire season, the GNWT implemented a new communications protocol to share information with Indigenous governments during emergency events. The GNWT created a joint information committee to enhance the coordination of public information dissemination and ensure consistent and accurate communications during emergencies. ECC provided a pre-season briefing to GNWT departments and Indigenous governments. ECC also provided weekly fire updates to other departments and to Indigenous governments through the Executive and Indigenous Affairs. MACA updated the NWT emergency plan. This comprehensive plan provides for improved coordination and planning during emergencies. It outlines the roles of emergency management partners in addressing widespread, large-scale, and complex emergencies with a particular emphasis on communications. Section 5 of that plan Section 5 of the updated plan details emergency communication activities across 3 critical phases. These include preparedness, response, and recovery. And ECC will also continue to meet with communities in the winter to review the past fire season and discuss concerns or issues prior to the next fire season. ECC has put a lot of effort into coordinating with municipal and Indigenous governments. Increased information sharing, communications, and cross-training initiatives have been provided for almost all of the mature local fire departments. This effort aims to improve improve the coordination and effectiveness of emergency response efforts with an emphasis on wildland-urban interface. ECC is committed to further expanding this collaboration, recognizing the value of shared expertise and joint training and enhancing community safety and preparedness. MACA is supporting these efforts through participation in to-be-created territorial and regional fire smart committees, which will be led by ECC. These committees will play a crucial role in planning and preparedness at the community level, fostering engagement with community leaders and local fire departments. MACA is also working closely with ECC to provide specialized training for local fire departments, including structural fire protection measures. This training is essential to ensure that communities are prepared and protected when facing the threat of an approaching wildfire. ECC and MACA have updated the wildfire event notification protocol, which is a standardized process for timely and effective communication between departments, ensuring that all relevant stakeholders are informed and prepared to respond to wildfire events. MACA has taken the proactive steps to ensure cooperation and coordination during joint responses involving community governments and Indigenous governments. They have introduced a new annex in the Community Emergency Plan template, which is designed to formalize commitments and outline the roles and responsibilities of all parties to ensure a clear and cohesive approach to emergency situations. Prior to the 2024 fire season, GNWT departments held a series of meetings on their respective roles, responsibilities, and coordinated their approach to planning, communications, and response during an emergency to ensure effective and efficient responses. The GNWT acknowledges the critical importance of ensuring that all parties involved in emergency management and community protection are aligned and can work together effectively. ECC is the lead for territorial and regional fire smart committees, which will also include participation of MACA, communities, Indigenous governments, and other stakeholders. Through these committees, ECC and MACA support comprehensive planning and preparedness efforts at the community level. This includes engaging with community leadership and local fire departments to develop and implement strategies for wildfire prevention and mitigation. ECC and MACA will also assist community governments in identifying and accessing financial resources necessary to undertake fire-smart community protection projects. ECC has been dedicating substantial effort and resources to enhancing its prevention and mitigation programs. A key component of these initiatives is the fire-smart program, including the Advanced Home Assessment Program, which has seen significant progress through 2024. ECC is committed to expanding and promoting these programs across the territory, ensuring that communities are better equipped and to prevent and mitigate the impacts of wildfire. ECC is reviewing the options to help streamline processes and organizational structures to ensure effective and efficient delivery of its wildfire management programs. The department will also review options to address MMP's recommendation in light of its current wildfire management operations and anticipated future needs. This will include a review of current program structures, approaches used in other jurisdictions, analysis of best practices, and the NWT Forest Fire Management Policy. To summarize our presentation, ECC is committed to implementing the 25 recommendations and 15 opportunities for improvement. Some recommendations have already been implemented, and many more can be implemented quickly and in place for the 2025 fire season. Some of the recommendations require financial investments that will need ongoing assessment and decision-making, and some recommendations are longer-term in nature, but ECC is committed to progressing to ensure each of the recommendations are implemented as promptly as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gravel, for your presentation. I'm going to now open it up for committee to ask questions, and as I know the presenters had mentioned, of course the MLAs have had this information, and a lot of what Mr. Gravel and certainly MMP had presented is stuff that we have read and reviewed, and I'll open the floor up for questions, and I'll start with MLA Reid. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Mental health supports are identified as a major gap in MNP's report. On their slide, there was a quote, "We haven't had the chance to celebrate the season. We also haven't had a chance to cry." I hope staff has had the chance to take a breath and do both by now. I'd like to get clarity as to whether ECC's response to mental health supports are voluntary, and if the approach may miss EFFs who are not permanent staff, and if so, whether this is a sufficient approach as all responders face pressures and trauma from the job. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MLA Reid. Minister MacDonald to Mr. Gravel. Thank you, Mr. Gravel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is certainly an area of growth and learning for us, meaning we still have room to improve. To your question, there's voluntary options that we encourage staff to take advantage of, such as counseling. We've started doing more group sessions, so with qualified individuals to work with our teams. Right now, I would say we're at the preliminary stages of formalizing how this all will work and look going ahead. Right now, we're reacting, I would say, but it is definitely high on our radar. As I mentioned, we have staff going to critical incident stress management training. This is a pretty major course where we hope to learn what tools are out there, what other agencies are doing, what tools we can offer our staff to support the mental health. And across country, this is a big topic in our business, as we're recognizing it's an area that was probably neglected in the past, but it's very much front and center today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gravel. Follow-up, Ms. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Slightly different line of questioning. And MNP, I feel like I'm on Sesame Street, recommends creating a culture of discipline regarding documentation and reporting. The ECC presentation speaks to ICS discipline, but did not specifically speak to record-keeping discipline. So can we get clarity if they're considered one and the same by ECC? Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Reid. Mr. Gravel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this again is another one we recognize we have room to improve. this is an issue that's been identified in other fire reviews that have come up, excuse me, where all of our documentation wasn't aligned. And I'm not going to make excuses, but sometimes what happens is people jump right in and do the job of fighting fires, and they don't always necessarily do all the paperwork that goes with it. And that's the area where we have to do better. That's the area where we have to provide more support. Unit leaders, what we call unit leaders, are staff that aren't necessarily fighting the fires, but they're helping do all the administrative stuff behind the scenes and making sure when we transition from one incident management team to another, there's a formal process of documentation transfer. So those are types of things where we need to improve, and we've recognized that, and it's a work in progress. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gravel. Next, we have MLA Testart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with the software enhancements that are needed to adequately model fire behavior, what are the kind of best practices in Canada that are used by wildfire fighting organizations that get you to your best results? And if either Mr. Abbott or Ms. McGarvey could answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. I will turn it over. Who would like from MMP to request maybe if Ms. McCarthy or Mr. Abbott can comment on that?
I can speak briefly to that. I think that as Director Gravel outlined, the areas that the territory is invested in now, including the two softwares, are ones that are used by other jurisdictions across Canada. And our recommendations here was in terms of best practice to ensure that the software is software that is used elsewhere for cross-compatibility. And I just want to emphasize too that in terms of best practices, and it's difficult for the territories, is that a lot of the other jurisdictions in Canada have finer resolution data sets available for that modeling software. So it's not just the software that's the key here, but predictions are only as good as the data. So your algorithms within the software, if there's challenges with the data sets and the resolution of the data, it's still going to lead to predictions that are not necessarily as accurate as you might hope. And so that's why that emphasis, and I know Director Gravel did in the response mention it, it's also that commitment in terms of a best practice to continuously trying to improve that resolution, for instance, of the forest floor fuel loading, and to update those data sets frequently. Thank you. I hope this helps.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Follow-up, Mr. Testart.
Yes, thank you. How many, so staff being, in addition to the data and the software, staff being trained on these is important. The departments noted that they are doing more training. Four staff are currently doing training course for advanced fire behavior. Can also MNP answer, like, what's the right amount of numbers that needs to be trained? Like, if 4 staff, if we need 30 and 4 are being trained, that's not very good. So can MNP speak to their recommendation on how many people need to be trained on the software? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. Mr. Abbott, back over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I wish I had a magic number for you. I think here's that, again, it's difficult with the extremes of the 2023 season, that at that point, the numbers that were trained was not sufficient. And that was, I don't have the exact numbers on hand, but they were definitely less than 5 at that stage. And a large number of external resources were also used for instance, weather predictive behavior modeling. The ideal number would come down to being able to run scenarios to better understand, and that would be our suggestion there, is to see what is going to be the average season normal, the capacity in which and the comfort for using external resources versus internal resources. But definitely the capacity that existed in 2023 wasn't sufficient. And I do suggest also, if I'm permitted, to pass to Director Gravel, because I know already the from what we understand, the investments excuse me, in the training and number of positions that have that specialist ability has already increased. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Mr. Gravel, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, it's an area where we recognize we could use more resources in this area. I will add, this is the challenge of being a small organization. We have many staff trained in advanced fire behavior and even fire behavior specialists. But I'll give an example. One of our regional managers, or all of our regional managers, are trained to this level. But they're also people we're asking to be the incident commander. They're also the person we're asking to be the operations section chiefs on these different fires. So every one of our staff were deployed actioning fires. That only left a few people behind to do the modeling. That was the challenge. All of our people that were trained to do this were actively fighting fires. The modeling part of this is more of a behind the desk, spitting out maps kind of things. And so we were limited to how many of those people we had in 2023, given the extreme nature of the season. It's not to say that we're not going to continue in training more people, enhancing the tools available to us, so that if we ever experience another 2023, we will have the resources and be better prepared for that scenario. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gravel. All right, next I have Mr. MLA Morse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am pleased to note that the department appears to be doing an assessment of the budgeting and reporting structure as recommended. Does the department kind of have an initial idea as to how much duplication of responsibilities exists in the current decentralized management model? It does strike me that in conjunction with the finding that we're under-resourced on the HR side, we have an opportunity here to consolidate and achieve efficiencies, which we could then put back into increasing our on-the-ground resources. So I'm curious to kind of hear about where the department's gotten to on that analysis so far.
Thank you, Mr. Morse. Minister MacDonald.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps I'll have Director Gravel start, and then Minister Kelly could also add to the comment, please.
Thank you. We'll start with Mr. Gravel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I want to preface this by stating that this is one of the recommendations that's still being worked on, so there's no formal plan here currently. What I'd also add is that my understanding of the direction we would go is it wouldn't change anything to do with resourcing at the regional level. Like our current situation at the regional level would remain the same. What would change is the reporting relationships and how accountability is held. And then it would provide for some efficiencies with work planning and budgeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gravel. I'll turn it over to Deputy Minister Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would definitely say that I don't see duplication among regions. I think the department is thin where our fire resources are considered. I do think that part of the conversation, we need to look at how many folks are leaving. For example, I'm just thinking of someone that we have in the Bodell who spent most of the last 2 years in the Southern NWT fighting fires. We're moving people around from the regions all the time. So I think people instantly think that those folks are staying in their regions and fighting the fires, but we're moving people around all the time. And 2023 has resulted in increased budgets for other jurisdictions because of many of the same issues that are being brought forward here. So this isn't an NWT alone issue. So I'm hopeful that when we do the review, we'll be able to look at the issues that the members brought forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Kelly. Follow up, Mr. Morse.
Thank you. Yeah, that answer makes sense, and it seems to me that if the fire seasons are kind of increasingly becoming, I hate getting into that word unprecedented. I've heard it so much in the past couple of years, but it just makes sense. Just to kind of continue on the thread that the previous member brought up, knowing that we've got limited resources, is the department looking at opportunities to potentially contract out some services like fire modeling? That one strikes me as one that might be well positioned for that, considering it's kind of a desktop exercise and could be done out of the territory. So wondering if the department's looking at that, or maybe is already doing it.
Thank you, MLA Morse. Mr. Gravel.
Mr. Chair. And yes, you're correct. That is something we currently do, and it was something we took advantage of in 2023 as well. I think as MNP pointed out, the challenges arise when you have seasons like 2023 and even to some extent 2024 where there's large-scale fires happening across the country. Then these contractors quickly become scarce because they're used up. One thing I will add, though, is we have some pretty impressive staff with programming skills, and one of the things we are working on is automated modeling. So for every fire that happens behind the scenes, the projections for growth will be made for all of our staff, and that'll be a great tool to have at our fingertips. So that's something that's being worked on, and with the goal of having in place for 2025. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gravel. Next, I have MLA Jericon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, no, I had a chance to go through the report. And, what comes to mind for me is that when I chaired the Mackenzie Valley Environmental Impact Review Board, one of the files we had in front of us was the Giant Mine file. And we spent a lot of time going through that project. And but at the end, there were recommendations that were made, and some of it was based on the idea of freezing the arsenic trioxide in the ground, and they had a plan. But part of the plan too talked about a 100-year flood. But I guess when I went through your report now, part of the mandate of MACA is talking about public safety, and then they transfer that responsibility to the hamlets and charter communities. The GWT MACA department has been around since 1967. But for me, when I went through this report, what stands out now is the public safety component. And I think I went through recommendations there, and it's supposed to be independent, and I went through it. There's still concerns that I have. We need to figure this one out, because we talk about a 100-year fire. And this one here just happened to be last year, where could have been really worse, and it could have hit. It could have been significant. For example, if it would have wiped out the community of Bishopcombe, say if they had 400 homes. Imagine we had to replace those homes, and the majority of people in small communities don't have home insurance, and that's a problem. And in small communities, we have high unemployment. In our communities, we don't have the jobs that we wish we had as larger centers. But to me, when I think about it now, it could have been significant to Bishopcombe. It could have been 800 or 400 homes at $800K to replace them. That would have been $320 million. Housing doesn't have the money. We could have been in a very tough position had we were in that position. But going forward, though, Kikiza lost 40 homes. Say magic numbers 800, that's 64 million. I'm just throwing out these numbers because I'm concerned. The Haber Reserve had 18 homes at 11.7 million. But if we are in a housing crisis as it is right now, going forward, though, like, how do we work as a minister, Mr. McDonald? How do we work with the Council of Leaders to figure out this one here? Because we had to come up with a strategy to work with Ottawa, to really look at as to how we could work with communities on this issue of insurance. And right now, if we don't do something soon on a 100-year fire, we're going to have problems. And last year, we could have been there. And I'm deeply concerned that right now, going forward, to continue to fund hamlets and small communities with minimal amount of dollars to meet the mandate of the government of Northwest Territories on public safety, I am concerned about that. So my question would be to the minister is, like, how can we work around this so that we could look at this issue in a broader sense and work with our partners, with the Indigenous governments and Government Canada. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Jericon. A little outside the scope on the review, but certainly an important issue. I'll ask Minister MacDonald to make a comment. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said. I mean, I think that, you know, the reality of today's fire environment is that there is that potential for the 100-year fire, as the member has suggested. You know, with our current climate change, you know, we're warming 4 times faster than the rest of the country. There's a lot of potential for things to be different than what we may have experienced in the past. With regard to the specifics around that, you know, the insurance issue, a lot of these other additional questions outside of the scope of this review will be addressed through the EIA review on the bigger response from the GNWT as a whole. And this, the question specifically to the insurance, I think is more related to the MACA portfolio really than ECC. Our role, we work very closely with the community is around the wildfire protection plans and, you know, supporting them in that way and how we help them to address the concerns and issues around the community. But from the insurance perspective, I think MACA is better positioned to address that one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister MacDonald. Follow-up, Mr. Jericon.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Minister. And I appreciate your comments on that too as well. There needs to be a way, if we could communicate that with your colleagues in cabinet, and then come up with a plan as to how we can bring this out, because it's a big issue. We could have been in a really tough position as a government. And my colleague, Ms. Riallen, MLA Riallen, her and I were in the 1970 when we were online, and we had to approve $100 million just to put towards the fire last year, and it was a very tough decision to do at the time, and it could have been worse. So I just want to just leave that with you, park it with you, if you could maybe look at that. The other thing is that what we got to do better on as well is that a lot of our people that went south, you know, we still have outstanding invoices that still needs to be resolved. But at the same time, you know, I lost members, you know, they're all over the place, etc. But we got to come up with a way to work with Indigenous governments again on a plan and better coordination as to if in the event that we ever come into this position again, because we had people that were brought south that had no money. They said, well, if you want to eat, you have to go over here. But they had no one to get over there, etc. Like we heard the stories. So I'm hoping that when you put this report together, that you guys got feedback from the community governments and Indigenous governments on this issue, because I heard it and I conveyed it. And the minister of the day in the 1970 was Minister Thompson, and I had a really good relationship with him as well. So we were lucky that he helped us out quite a bit on this. But it's an issue that needs to be brought out too. So I'm not sure how you're going to deal with that. It's just that for me, as an oversight on this thing, that I would like to see that we could do better on this area. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MLA Jericon. Minister MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. Yes, I mean, I think, again, this is certainly questions that need to come to Cabinet, and I believe that a lot of this, of the 2 questions that you just raised will certainly be addressed in the EIA overall review of the total GNWT response. I believe one sort of fits into MACA and one into finance, so they sort of fit into a couple of portfolios outside of mine directly. You know, this report really is focused primarily on ECC's response to the fire directly, and not so much at the overall government response to the fires, which I think will be addressed in the additional report. But I'm certainly very happy to relay the members' questions to my colleagues in Cabinet. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister MacDonald. I understand we are here until 12:30 today if required. I still have 3 more MLAs for the opening round, and then we'll look at doing the second round, and the MLAs and committee can decide if you'd like to take a break prior to continuing. Next, I have MLA Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to just open my comments, and it's framed around this quote that I'm aware of. And, you know, if you could replace the word wind with fire, but it's a sailing analogy that I think rightly fits in this situation. It says, we cannot manage the wind, but we can adjust our sails. So a pessimist will complain about the wind, and an optimist will expect it to change, but a realist will adjust their sails. And really what it's talking about, the unpredictability of wind, hence I'm using the direct analogy of the unpredictability and management of fire. So my question is, knowing that we don't have endless resources, and that said, you know, fighting every fire would quickly bankrupt us faster than we're doing it to ourselves, as they say. That's a hint. That's a what do they call it? An Easter egg for the public. But the ultimate point is how are we adjusting our sails in terms of human resources, be it seasonal, part-time, full-time, or you know, management deployment of resources amongst other regions? How are we managing incoming technology, and how are we being honest with ourselves on the realistic ability of fighting these fires? Because I think it just seems like it's one of these all hands on deck regardless, and it's important, it is, but the thing is that realistically the right direction to go? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Minister MacDonald.
I'll make a brief comment and then I'll pass it to my colleagues. But I think a very good question. I think it's important to recognize, I mean, my background coming from the department, I have some firsthand, experience working in the fire program for 13 years. And I think that, if you look at 2023 in its entirety and the stress that it put on the country as a whole, certainly had a significant impact on how we as the territory would normally utilize our resources within our own capacity, in that we always have the ability to go to CIFC through our mutual aid agreement and in a normal year pull in additional resources that supplement or support what we have internally within our own capacity. So I think, when you look at one-off years like 2023, and we sure hope it's a one-off year, there's a connection there that you use as a planning tool within our organization, in that we know we have certain capacity and we have certain weaknesses in our capacity, but there are other tools within the toolbox that allow you to supplement that. So I'll just maybe leave that as my opening comment, and I'll pass to Director Gravel to add to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister MacDonald. Mr. Gravel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think everyone's aware that we're simply not able, nor do we want to action every fire, so fires can play out their ecological role and prevent these large catastrophic fires from occurring like we saw in 2023. So where we're putting a lot of our efforts is in areas such as prevention and mitigation. So public education, we do have the ability, society has the ability to eliminate human-caused fires. Fort Good Hope was evacuated this year due to a human-caused fire. Catlodeche's fire was a human-caused fire. If we could eliminate human-caused fires, that will reduce the risk immediately around our communities. And then if we put the effort that we're moving towards right now, towards changing the fuels around our communities, making our communities more resilient to wildfire, and mitigating the risk, I think those are the key areas that we're working on currently. And then, of course, when we do need to fight fires, have the proper planning and tools in place and preparedness in place for that, which again, I believe we're working towards. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gravel. Follow-up question, MLA Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, one of the issues, I appreciate the answers. I mean, these are not, they're not easy questions to answer. As a matter of fact, I'd be surprised if anyone could really, really answer them. And that's not a question of credibility. It's just they're so big and complex. I'll just end with this. I mean, every year seems to be a one-off. 100 years seems to be every year now on every subject. So if it isn't fire, it's floods. If it isn't floods, it's these logistics. It just seems to be everything. So I guess I ultimately want to finish off by saying, like we can't control climate change in the way that we think we can. It's coming with a full train, like a full-speed train running without brakes, and we will do modifications and adjustments of behavior, but in the short term, we're not going to be changing these things. So at the end of the day, my question now is because of, is there a way that the department or even MNP sees a way we can fight fires differently? And there are many jurisdictions out there similar to us that may have started to break technology on approaches on fighting fires in large areas, whether it's Australia or California or, like a large jurisdiction that says, we're doing this differently because we couldn't fight it the traditional way. And it'll take some thinking and some innovation, and I doubt there's a direct model, but I mean, if you compare the NWT to, say, PEI, I mean, there's a small town and fire department every 20 kilometers or less, so they don't have the open spaces and whatnot. But maybe Australia does, or maybe India does, or maybe, some country of that type of concept, has started to ask themselves, we're not fighting them all, but we're taking our approach differently. So that's really where the question is how are other jurisdictions of similarity? Are we studying that? Or are we looking for shared resources and maybe combined we come up with a stronger strategy? Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Hawkins. Mr. Gravel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the question. So everyone is aware, so we work collaboratively at the national level, so I work with all the other directors from across Canada. We get together and talk about types of issues like this. Some examples of things that you're asking about, Alberta this past year started using nighttime helicopters to action fires, so night vision. So that's one opportunity potential down the road. They're the first agency to do so, so we're testing and learning how effective that was. There's probably challenges for us in the sense that we already have limited resources, and now if they're being used at night, those are things we'll have to cost-benefit analysis on, but that's one example. Again, I think going back to prevention and mitigation, there's opportunities to reintroduce cultural burning. Indigenous people long used fire as a tool on the landscape, prescribed fires in and around communities to remove the risk and to have a fire in a controlled state rather than that uncontrolled state. There's opportunities there for that. We have communities that have reached out to us with an interest to go down that road, and then also there's opportunities to provide or improve wildlife habitat using prescribed fire. So improve wildlife habitat for certain species and eliminate the risk of fires around the community that has multiple benefits. So those are some of the types of things we're looking at. Again, those are things that I would say are more long-term. Carrying out prescribed fire around a community obviously requires a lot of planning, a lot of communication, a lot of engagement, and a lot of education, so that people understand what it is we're doing and why, and what the end results will benefit the majority of people. But those are two examples I can share with you. And you're right, it's an evolving industry, and this isn't just unique to the Northwest Territories. All agencies are feeling stressed. Just as an example, the British Columbia spent $1.1 billion fighting fires last year. So we can spend as much money as you want to spend in this business. It's unlimited, and that's not a reality for us. We have to manage within our means, and so the biggest bang for our buck is to find ways to make our communities more resilient, less at risk, if you will. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gravel. Any comments from MNP on that specific question? Mr. Hawkins did mention he would like to hear from MNP on that as well.
Mr. Chair, I'd say that it was somewhat beyond the scope for us to do a jurisdictional scan to look at the innovations within the wildfire management sphere. Although I will support that the comments that Director Gravel made fall within some of the practices we're seeing as far as innovations, including the the ability to fight fires with night vision. I'd say that there's always opportunity to better match specific types of equipment, including air resources, with the particular dynamics of a fire and the fuel situation. You know, that said, that gets into higher resource needs and financial expenditures potentially to be able to have on hand a full suite or complement of air resources for every specific fire. And air resources are not the only answer in situations. I think it's the one that's most publicly visible, so it's easy to point to those. But we can certainly check with some of our experts that were on this project. We'd be happy to get back to Director Gravel, and then in turn, he can provide those answers to Minister McDonald, if that helps. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Next, I have MLA McNeely.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at your report and thinking, you know, that's 2023 situations that we weren't here with, and looking at the after-action review and what we learned. And as recently as this summer could be included as part of this, to really say, okay, did we learn anything from 2023 to apply to 24 season? So I just bring that discussion in to say, okay, you know, let's look at that and see where we can pull up our socks, basically. And if we look at mental health, I spent 3 weeks in my living community there, attending where was needed there during the evacuation in June and beginning of July. For the Fort Good Hope wildfire evacuees. Then on the other end, we had leadership there doing the same thing, protecting their community. So we were in constant communication daily on what they're doing and what we're doing. And when I think about it, there back in our last sitting, I asked the Minister of MACA, okay, your reviews, the emergency management plans and the emergent response plans and your community preparedness plans, have they been discussed downtown Toledo with the leadership? Yes. Okay. I just use Toledo as an example. It's all our communities. Sit down like we are right now, face to face, have a discussion and review your plan. It's all part of the evacuation plans that we constantly have safety drills for on the job site. In this case, you're talking about your community protection. So long story short there, it never happened. Apparently there was a Zoom call with the leaders down in McKenzie Valley, and here's our community preparedness conference as part of the preparations and consultation. So physically, it never did happen downtown Toledo. The regional office never took the initiative to fly 15 minutes and have that meeting and go through with the local government to make sure that they're ready. And it never happened in Good Hope as well. So how can you say that your community is prepared when in fact there was no water pumps in Fort Good Hope? Had you identified the weaknesses and did our checks and balances, we could have found out, okay, well, there's no water pumps there. The community of Fort Good Hope, the local government, hadn't spent $100,000 in buying the materials needed. So I just red flag that, and we can look at exactly doing what you're doing. It's just make sure it gets done. And on the issue of the accident there with the chopper pilot, Captain First there in Fort Good Hope, the initial crew that was at the site was from Toledo. There was 5 members, 5 young guys there from Toledo. So they did go there and they did help out and seen the wreckage. And the fire boss made a good call and sent them home after what they seen and what they experienced with the wreckage and the poor pilot in that wreckage. So they they're probably still having thoughts about what they see, digging through the rubble. So I was asked there to see if there was any mental health supports that these individuals could take, but it never went anyplace. I asked, but I was told that they can go to the local health center. So that's not the answer I was recommending. I was recommending a trauma team fly in and do some on-site consultation with these young people. But it never did happen. So when I see that mental health there, it's good, but let's make sure it happens. And hopefully we won't be in a situation like this, like these two past summers, where it really hit home to a lot of communities and a lot of losses. People lost their cabins, personal effects. Thank God the fire came close to Good Hope, but it never did burn any power lines, for example. But anyways, I just highlight that to include in our move forward. Let's, like you say, you do an after a seasonal review. If we look at the Fort Good Hope situation, I think we can strengthen our procedures. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA McNeely. Sure what exact question was in there, but certainly I think it was based on ensuring that we continue best efforts and we follow through on the recommendations from the review we just received. But I'll have Minister MacDonald speak to it, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I can't, I don't have at the tip of my fingertips the references to the two examples that the member brought forward with Toledo and Fort Good Hope. But I know our staff do plan annual meetings with the communities and Indigenous governments and Indigenous organizations and the public to talk about the community wildfire protection plans in all of the forested communities across the NWT as part of our annual business plan. And the as far as the emergency response plan, a big part of that falls under with the Minister of MACA. On that side of things, our role, we're certainly always involved in those discussions, but certainly do potentially have a MACA lead. So this time I'll pass it to Director Gravel if he would like to add to that question.
Thank you, Minister MacDonald, and I'll go to Mr. Gravel for comments as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm in agreement. And as I said earlier to the earlier question, this is an area, the mental health side, where we're definitely learning a lot more and investing a lot more into improving what how we serve our staff. I can say that we did hire mental health specialists to go into both Fort Good Hope and Toledo. I can't speak to, I don't have the names of exactly who was there, but they were there to go see our people that were involved in that tragic incident. The other pieces, I do want to share that specific fire is also under a fire review, so we're going to learn more about what took place, and then again, more lessons learned out of that, so more opportunities for us to improve. And so, as I mentioned earlier, our goal is to be a professional and strong organization, and we get there by learning through these types of scenarios. So all I can say is we'll continue to identify what we can do better and keep doing what we do well and move forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gravel. Next I have MLA Whalen Armstrong.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. And I know that, forest fire of 2023, it's been reported, considered one of the worst. And I do agree with that. And it created a lot of chaos in the whole process, especially for the people. And I'm still hearing from people that are suffering from it. You know, the post-traumatic stress. So even from the South Mackenzie all the way up north. So I'm hearing about it, and it did had a lot of effect on us, and the people are still suffering. And I know that mental health is a major issue. We already had mental health crisis in the NWT, and this added more to it. So, and I'm glad that you mentioned, but not in a great detail. But what I want to mention here is that, okay, here, where is it? MACA is going to be, MACA in, not that one, where was it? Okay, 4 staff are currently at a so for training part, so 4 staff are currently at a national training course on advanced fire behavior. What about those outside of JNWT? I just want to know if this advanced fire behavior, is that being extended to others, like contractors or community government staff, who are also frontline workers in all this too? So why only 4 staff at, like from JNWT are being considered for this advanced fire behavior? Because our people are there, so I just want to know why only 4 are identified in this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Whalen Armstrong. Mr. Gravel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That specific course is, as the name implies, an advanced level fire behavior course, so there's prerequisite requirements to be eligible to apply. So you need to be actively involved in managing fire. So it wouldn't be open to, say, the general public or people that aren't in the business of fighting fire. However, it is open. It's not just GNWT, it's anyone within our program. So contract firefighters would also be eligible. And we have contract firefighters on our training list, based on where we see them developing within the program. So it is open to contractors that work for us and GNWT employees that meet predefined qualification requirements. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gravel. Deputy Minister Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think overall what I'm hearing from the member is opportunities for folks in communities to be trained on some of these places, especially where we interact. And my understanding from some discussions with MACA is that some of the incident command training is being made available to Indigenous governments and communities who participate in the fire. So the underlying message that you're saying is people, not just the GNWT needs to be trained, others do too. And my understanding is that is happening from an incident command system perspective. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Kelly. Follow up, Ms. Whalen Armstrong.
Yes, it did say that GNWT and its staff, that's what it says in the report, so that's what I'm referring to. Why only GNWT, why not to other, like community government? And I know that you did mention in here that incident command system, and I would like to know how, if that department can explain how it's going to roll out, like to the, like you just said, like community government.
Thank you, Ms. Whalen Armstrong. Minister MacDonald.
Yes, thank you for that. So I'll just speak quickly to the incident command system itself. And as like I referenced earlier, as a part of my previous life within the department, I was a trainer for incident command on the logistics side of things, and participated in right up to the 400 level certification within ICS. I think it's really important. I think it's a really important point, and that this collaborative effort with community governments, Indigenous governments, Indigenous organizations on the ICS come to the forefront. One of the challenges, I think, from my experience in the years gone by is where we've committed as a government to ICS as our command system that we're going to use sort of in a all hazards approach. And I think ensuring that we have adequate people that have an understanding of the system, how it works and how it functions, is critical to its success moving forward. And certainly that includes the folks that are our partners in this as we move forward in different areas. So, a big part of how this rolls out is a question certainly for MACA. They are the lead on the ICS training piece and how they will roll that out with all of our partners. I can't speak to, but certainly happy to take that question back to Minister McKay and get a response for the member. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister McDonald, and I inadvertently cut off Ms. Whaler Armstrong, and I'm going to go back, but I have a quick one I'm going to sneak in here with the committee's permission. It is on the same topic, and you mentioned in your presentation about cross-training with Indigenous governments, and I note that traditional knowledge wasn't mentioned kind of in the presentation itself. I'm sure it's in there, and I'm assuming some of that training will also be going back to our GNWT employees on traditional knowledge. And the other thing we had heard from some members is that is there any appetite to not only provide training for Indigenous and local governments and the community governments as well, but also potentially some equipment so they're allowed to be able to either train and or provide some of the work in the communities, whether that be building berms or doing that type of work. Thank you. Minister McDonald.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, certainly. I mean, I think traditional knowledge plays a big role in how we fight fire in the Northwest Territories. I mean, I think over the last number of years, our level of traditional knowledge has really, it was noticeable that you could see we were starting to lose that traditional knowledge, and I think after 2023, that was certainly recognized. That we had a lot of our elder statesmen in the fire program were, retiring, moving on. So I think we've identified that as an area that we can improve in, and ensuring how we keep that traditional knowledge, from those elder firefighters, and share that, and through mentorship and really good communication with our younger firefighters to ensure that remains a strong part of the program. Sorry, I forgot the second part of your question. Oh, equipment. So, yeah, so there's a role within the program for community fire departments, for community fire brigades, etc., and there's a role for the wildland firefighters, and the two aren't necessarily the same role. So, community fire departments are prepared and trained to do structural firefighting. Wildland firefighters are prepared and trained to do wildland firefighting. Two similar yet very different roles with very different equipment, and all of our regions are stocked with a standard amount of equipment based on an average year to support wildland firefighting activities. Communities themselves, that accessing that equipment directly would be something that would happen through MACA or potentially through another source. There is a little bit of equipment sharing, not in a huge way, but with some of the fire departments that are cross-trained, just to support if there was a very small event within the community. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister McDonald, and I'll go back to Ms. Whaler Armstrong, and then I have two other members waiting, and hopefully we can get everyone in prior to having closed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, one of the questions was traditional knowledge, because I didn't see it in the report that nothing was mentioned of the traditional knowledge, because with the indigenous people love their land. I'm sure they would not want it to be burned just, for regrowth. But they do love their land. If they have the resources, they will take preventative measure to put it out as soon as it started. I know that that's a fact, that, a lot of indigenous people, that's what they would do, because even as one of the small community in my riding, they asked for additional water pump, so that because the fire was getting close. So that way they can, take it upon themselves, because they do have some people there. Some are retirees. They have a lot of knowledge to fight these fires. And none, it didn't happen. So with the traditional knowledge is very important. And, I don't think they would, indigenous people, they don't like to see their land destroyed, and especially with their hunting area, hunting grounds, and, because we do rely on our country food. So now our land is disrupted. The habitat is, like that animals are used to, it's gone, so now we have to find other routes. So I'm just a little bit disappointed that traditional knowledge was not identified in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Whalmer Armstrong, and I apologize for jumping in on your question. Minister MacDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I agree. I mean, traditional knowledge is certainly a critical component of fighting fire. I mean, I've been privileged to have worked alongside some very experienced Indigenous firefighters, that have been doing this for 30, 40 years. Had the opportunity to talk with them through many of the activities I was involved in the past, as far as training and, as well as other aspects of my life, working with different people across the NWT. I think that that's certainly a critical component, and ensuring that we keep that traditional knowledge in our programs, and that we're passing that knowledge on and keeping it top of mind as we're developing, as we're looking forward, and how we are creating our program going forward, and ensuring that that is always part of our program. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister MacDonald. And I believe I see a hand up from Ms. McCarthy as well from MNP.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to speak to MLA Whalen's comments around traditional knowledge. Thank you for that observation. I think it's really important. I will note that recommendation 10.2, we do speak of the need to improve information, including traditional knowledge and Indigenous understanding around cultural values at risk and traditional values at risk. The GNWT does maintain a system of values at risk that is one of the strengths of their wildfire response program, particularly around existing infrastructure. But we did recommend, and we did hear, and I believe reflected back in the report, the need to do a bit more work around identifying those cultural areas that may be values at risk, and traditional harvesting areas, hunting areas that also may be values at risk, and improve that registry so that future hazard responses are able to take those into account. I think we also did identify the need to use Indigenous knowledge in wildfire prevention in terms of Indigenous prescribed burning, and Director Gravel did speak to plans to look at that in the future. So thank you for the comment and the observation that, around that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McCarthy. We have a quick comment, Minister MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add to that, so as part of our value at risk database, an example for the member is that caribou habitat is identified as part of our value at risk database. So that, there are those cultural and traditional items that are included as part of the program as well. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister MacDonald. Now we'll move to MLA Yakalaya.
Thank you. Thank you, and yeah, thanks for the report. Very interesting. There's a lot of things in there that a lot of people talk about. There's so much. I'm very passionate about this because this directly affects one of my communities that I represent, and people are still going through a not easy time because of the 2023 wildfires. Communication, there's a lot. There's training. It says in the report that there was lots not happening. There was a lot of things that were not happening. One of the things that, and I'm not sure if it was member Jericon brought up a prescribed burning, or was it member McNeely? Anyways, the prescribed burning, safety for communities. Years ago, I remember years ago, I know that this happened in our community. growing up, I saw my dad was a firefighter, and they used to burn the grass around the community. And it was all controlled because our firefighters were there. But at that time, they didn't have the big machines that we have today. They had little pumps with a water bag behind them, and they were controlling the burn. So people have asked me about that, and I said I would mention it. But that prescribed burn for community controlled burn in a community would help a community. I'm sure it would have saved. I can't say right now, but that safety, because one of the mandates for the I know for forestry they talked about human life, protect human life, save human life, protect values, and what was it, human life and structures. So in the 2023 wildfires, the one that went through Enterprise, this wasn't done. So, you know, a lot of the houses burned and all this. So all of the stuff that has been recommended is very needed. Now looking at, because people have to go to work sooner and stay longer because of the year, like the fire started in April, so it's going longer. Has there been any discussion with the federal government on investment into the longer term working hours for people? Because right now people work seasonally. So they work from, I don't know, was it May till August? I'm not sure how that works, but, and then they go on EI for the rest of the year. So can that investment be looked at and given to the territorial government rather than going on EI? Can they work longer? So that's something that I was thinking about for, because it's work. It's work, and also, yeah, that's one question. So thank you.
Thank you, MLA Akalaya. I'll turn it to Mr. Gravel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the question. That is definitely one of the issues we're looking to resolve, and we have reached out to the federal government to see what funding we might be able to utilize for the long term to improve our overall fire management program and possibly cover many of the recommendations that are in here. But having firefighters work longer seasons, well, one, it's inevitable. We're doing it now regardless. It's just a matter of having the resources to make it sustainable. So we are working on that. We do have some staff now that are being funded through some federal programs that we've got from Natural Resources Canada, which has extended their seasons, which has allowed us in some cases to bring these folks on early and keep people working. We still have some of our seasonal staff working right now, for example, and we're into mid-October. And normally, like you say, they're finished in August. So it is something we're working on. Unfortunately, it's not something, though, that I have signed agreements in place and that it's in place. So it's an ongoing process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Have a follow-up, Ms. Akalaya?
Yeah, I do. No, that was looking at the investment, because you need training dollars, you need extra money for them to work a longer period of time. Why not access the money from EI to cover that cost? That was one thing. The other one was, what of the doing controlled burns in the community? And the other one I'm really passionate about is the fire towers. I want them manned. I want, like, for me, it's safety. If the internet goes out, you won't be able to see. If it's cloudy, you're not able to see. So to have a human on the tower, they will see it, they can report it, they can call it in. So you're using a technology, the software that they're talking about. A lot of that is, well, it's valuable, but years ago, fighting fires, people were in the towers. there was humans in the towers. And I heard it talked about liability. Well, has anybody fallen off or gotten hurt or died in those towers all through the history of the, like, is there anything like that? So it doesn't, for me, it's more reliable to have somebody up there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shakalaya. I'll go to Mr. Gravel, and hopefully we got one more on the list that we'll squeeze in before 12:30.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just regarding the controlled burns, again, that is an area we want to pursue. And the difference is we want to do this in collaboration with the community, in particular the local fire department. So ECC working with the local fire department, plan it together, train together, look at all of our equipment needs together, and make it a true collaborative approach. So that's the model we're looking to use going forward. With respect to towers, unfortunately, it is the shift away from having people work in isolation and working in remote areas by themselves. And yes, fortunately in the Northwest Territories, we have not had serious accidents or fatalities, but yes, there have been fatalities of tower people. We've had, not us, but in this industry, we've had tower people that were killed by bears at their sites. We've had people fall while climbing up the ladder and be hanging there, suspended in air. It is also with risk. And so many agencies across Canada are moving away from having people work in isolation and moving to the technology that's available. And the technology also has advantages. It's 24/7, 7 days a week. A tower person is not in the tower every hour of the day. They go up for a period of time, usually mid-afternoon when it's getting hot or lightning starts. And they also have to get down if there's lightning, because a lot of times it's risky to be up there. So the towers do have some advantages. And our goal is not to eliminate positions or jobs. We've moved people into other roles. So yeah, I don't see us going back to having towers with people unless they're close enough to a community where maybe the risk isn't as great. But having people in remote sites is probably not a direction we're going to go towards that I can see. And I think the technology, the way we hope to go with the technology is every single town has cameras around them, providing views of any potential fires, but also for people to check the weather. And we do that a lot. If we have to fly into the mountains, for example, to do work, you can go and look at the camera and see what the cloud cover is and how low the cloud is or what have you. So there's a lot of other advantages to having camera. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Gravel. And now I have Ms. Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wondered, so in the report, it does talk a lot about the need for better cooperation and coordination between different agencies and municipalities and Indigenous governments. And I wondered if the MNP folks had reviewed the renewed NWT emergency plan that was released, I think it was last spring, and could comment on whether they feel that it has addressed any deficiencies in that regard, or whether there are other best practices that need to be incorporated into our NWT emergency plan or the appendices or annexes that are attached to it.
Thank you, MLA Morgan, and I'll turn it over to MNP to respond.
So again, not within the scope of this particular review, and so we would be hesitant at this point to provide you with some feedback on whether or not it includes what it needs to include. Thank you.
Ms. McCarthy, and brief follow-up. Sorry, Minister McDonald has a comment on that one as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe just to that point, that would be part of the EIA's overall review. That should be covered under the scope of work for that project. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister McDonald, and final follow-up from MLA Morgan.
Okay, thanks. So just a quick follow-up would be, what steps has the GNBT taken to formalize the recommended MOUs recommended in the report?
Thank you, MLA Morgan and Minister MacDonald.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I think that would be more of a question for MACA. So certainly from ECC's perspective, we have done a lot of work in our communication protocols and how we were relaying information this summer to MACA as well as to Indigenous governments, Indigenous organizations. There's an additional layer of communication. I guess once the information goes to MACA, they have those direct communications with the communities, et cetera, as different events unfold. Primarily, ECC provides the data and information from the fire with a recommendation if one is necessary. And then that is broken down that way. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister MacDonald. So that brings us to 12:32. I kept you just 2 minutes over. Certainly appreciate Ms. McCarthy, Mr. Abbott online, other folks online that have been tuned in for the last 2 hours. Minister MacDonald, staff, great presentation. I'd like to thank everyone here. And at that, we will conclude the public hearing. And again, thank you very much.